Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colton LeBlanc, and I'll be your moderator today. Joining us, we have Colton LeBlanc, Minister of Cybersecurity and Digital Solutions, as well as Natasha Clark, Deputy Minister of Cybersecurity and Digital Solutions. They're here to provide an update on the impact of the global breach of the MOVEit file transfer system here in Nova Scotia. We're going to start with some remarks from Minister LeBlanc, and then we'll move to media for questions. Minister, if you'd like to get started.
Thank you very much, Kalela. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm here today along with my Deputy Minister Natasha Clark, to provide you with an update on our ongoing investigation into the MOVEit global cybersecurity breach that has impacted Nova Scotia. Earlier this week, I announced that as many as 100,000 Nova Scotians were impacted, including employees of the Public Service, Nova Scotia Health, and the IWK Health Centre. Today, I can provide more specifics on our findings to date, clarify some of the groups within government who were impacted and how. I can also confirm some members of the public have been affected. This is an evolving situation. As I stressed at our last update, the details we are sharing with you today could change. Here is some new information and more specifics on our findings. Today, we have discovered that about 55,000 records of certified and permitted teachers, past and present, had their name, address, date of birth, and other employment and demographic data stolen. It does not include social insurance numbers or banking information. About 26,000 students aged 16 years and older had their information stolen, including date of birth, gender, student ID, and school. This information was in the database because it was shared with Elections Nova Scotia. About 5,000 registered short-term accommodation owners had their information stolen, including name, address, property address, and registration number. About 1,400 recipients of Nova Scotia pensions were impacted. About 100 vendors who provide services to Nova Scotia Health have had their product and pricing information stolen. Banking information does not seem to be included. 41 newborns born between May 19th and 23rd had their information stolen, including last name, health card number, date of birth, and date of discharge. About 1,330 people in the Department of Health and Wellness's client registry had their data compromised, including name, address, date of birth, and health card number. About 60 people with the prescription monitoring program were impacted with their names, addresses, dates of birth, health card number, and personal health information being stolen. Just over 150 people in the Department of Health and Wellness's provider registry, including doctors, specialists, nurses, and optometrists, have been impacted. This includes their names, addresses, and dates of birth. It does not include social insurance numbers or banking information. So far, it does not look like Nova Scotia Health employees have had their banking information included in the breach files. The complete list of what our investigation has found to date will be added on our privacy breach website at novascotia.ca/privacy-breach. As I've said before, no individual or organization is immune from the risk of cyber threats or theft. This is the world we live in now. Cybercrime is real. I know many of the people impacted are wondering when they will be contacted and when they will learn more about the free credit monitoring and fraud protection services we will offer. Some of the details are still being worked out, and I want to thank you for your patience. Our plan is to start sending letters as soon as next week, and that information will be included. In today's day and age, I encourage all Nova Scotians to monitor their banking information closely, as this is a matter of good practice. I want to remind all Nova Scotians to be on guard against scammers who will try to take advantage of this breach. If a person reaches out to you by phone, by text, or email, make sure you know who they are and why they're asking you for your personal information. When the province begins reaching out to notify people impacted by the breach, we will not ask you for your health card, we will not ask you for your social insurance number, banking information, or other personal information or money. Please be careful and don't give anyone your personal information or money. And please continue to check out our privacy website for updates at novascotia.ca/privacy-breach. We'll continue to share new information as details emerge. Thank you, and we'll now take your questions.
Thank you, Minister. We are going to follow our one question, one follow-up format. And if time permits, I will go through the list of registered reporters again. So I'll call on you when it's your turn. To start, we have Jean Laroche with CBC.
Thanks, Kalila. Before I ask my question, though, can I implore on the government, because there's a lot of information that comes out, that you endeavor to give us the news release ahead of the statement so that we have time to prepare questions. That's the only point I'll make on that. Minister or Deputy, we know that the Auditor General has reported a number of times about deficiencies or inadequacies in terms of cyber protection in the province. Given that, how prepared were we for this kind of attack?
So I'll certainly start there, Jean, for that question. What I'd say is, if we look at the evolution of change and the acceleration of change in society, and how much technology has changed so much in the last couple of decades, and how we're predicting over the next 2 decades there'll be more change than in the last 3 centuries. Our best practices and the ways that we look at mitigating cyber threats and risk has to also evolve. And that's something within our department, a new department, which sort of underscores the importance for our government of taking this seriously. It is a priority for our government, and it should be a priority for every individual and organization. As I noted, no one is immune from these threats. And I'd certainly add that we aren't the first province or jurisdiction in the country, and unfortunately, we likely won't be the last. But we are always looking at ways of bolstering our cybersecurity measures, and certainly we'll do that with our internal expertise, external expertise, and leveraging the knowledge from across country.
All right, as a follow-up, Deputy, I realize you're still in the midst of this. However, at first blush, are there things you will do going forward that will further protect us against these kinds of cyber attacks?
Thank you for the question. And as the minister said and has already spoken to, this is an evolving space, and we will, continue to learn and evolve. I will also comment that, yes, obviously we're in the focus and in the throes of things, so our focus is on doing that analysis and being as transparent with Nova Scotians as quickly as we can. So that is our primary focus. But in terms of the question, I obviously will also be making lists of things, as we do with any incident that we have across government or in any organization, about improvements, continuous improvement, which I think is an important way in which we work here at the Cybersecurity Digital Solutions Department. So we will obviously do lessons learned and debriefs when the time is right, but the focus right now is on doing that analysis and being transparent as quickly as we can with Nova Scotians.
Thank you, Deputy. Next, we have Brian Flynn with All Nova Scotia. Brian?
Yeah, as Jean noted, we haven't really had time to look at the press release. I'm just wondering if either of you could tell us what the total count is right now, what the total number is for both, if you could break it down into members of the public service and members of public, how many in total have been affected?
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Brian. What I'd say is, during our investigation, or as I noted earlier this week, through our investigation, that count was upwards to 100,000 Nova Scotians, and there was a possibility that could change. What we're realizing and throughout our investigation is that one individual could be impacted through a couple different breaches when we're talking about the data at this time. So, for example, a teacher could also be a former employee of the civil service, could also have had a parking ticket through HRM. So those are 3 instances that we've identified that have been compromised. So one individual could be impacted a number of different ways. So we're still looking at the entirety of the records, and But to give a definitive count at this time, we're still moving forward with our investigation.
And do you have a follow-up, Ryan?
Yes, I do. I asked the department yesterday if it was going to do anything about this information apparently is being held ransom. Is it your understanding right now that this information is being held for ransom? And if you could just explain in your own words why it is that the province has decided not to deal with any organization that claims to be holding this for ransom.
So we have not been asked for ransom. We indicated that previously. The organization that's claiming to be leading this cyber attack is a group of organized criminals. They are cyber criminals. The day that government starts doing business with organized crime, we certainly have to be reconsidering our priorities as a province. We will not be engaging with cyber criminals.
Thank you, Minister. Next, we're going to go to Keith Doucette with Canadian Press.
Hi, I'm just wondering if any other software systems have been compromised as a result of this breach.
Thank you for the question. Our investigation as it related to this particular breach has been, and this particular vulnerability that was identified has been solely focused on the particular Move It platform, and our investigation has not indicated any other compromises throughout the system as it pertains to this particular vulnerability.
And just as a follow-up on that, as a result of that, regardless, does this mean a total relook at the system right across the system, and perhaps changes that could be in store in terms of bolstering security? Is that ultimately what's going to result from all of this?
Thank you for the question. I think the minister touched on this a bit earlier, that this is definitely cybersecurity and cyber activity has been a growing concern for some time. We've talked about how it is a top priority across the globe in terms of a growing, business. And so as part of that, and as part of good best practice, looking at our technology estate, our processes, how we do our work, is a priority for us and would have been regardless of this breach. But of course, we're obviously focused heavily right now on dealing with this particular breach so that we can bring as much comfort as we can to Nova Scotians at this time. We know that it is a period of time where there are more questions perhaps than answers. We're doing our best to get those answers as quickly to you as we can. But definitely continuous improvement is a priority and a way in which we work here at the CSDS. And that's just how we'll continue to proceed and making sure that we're delivering things in a way that Nova Scotians are expecting of us today.
And moving along, we're going to go to Jesse Thomas with CTV. Jesse?
Just a question for clarification on some numbers. Minister LeBlanc, you mentioned as many as 100,000 Nova Scotians are impacted. I'm wondering if the specifics and the numbers you gave us today, is that on top of the 100,000 Nova Scotians that you mentioned before?
So that'd be part of the previous number of 100,000 that we spoke about earlier this week, and so today is about providing more transparency, more clarity, a breakdown of those impacted. Again, I'd highlight that one individual could be impacted through a couple different ways, a couple different examples. As I noted, a civil servant who had received a parking ticket who was also a teacher, for example. So one individual could be impacted in more than one way and could perhaps receive more than one letter, but we're certainly focusing on continuing our investigation and communicating as soon as possible directly to Nova Scotians. That communication is targeted to start next week. And again, I'd remind Nova Scotians that we will not be asking for personal information or money, and we will be reaching out directly. So caution and watch out for these phishing scammers that may look at taking advantage of the situation.
Thank you, Minister. Jesse, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering what this software company is doing in parts of this investigation that we're undertaking. How are they cooperating, and how have we identified perhaps the weakness here and strengthened it moving forward?
Well, once, as we've indicated already, that once we were made aware of the vulnerability, we brought the service down, did the patching that the company has provided to us, and brought the service back up. And then after the subsequent information that we received, did our further testing and determined that we had this vulnerability. So we that we had a breach, I guess I should say. And so subsequently, they're continuing to push updates to ensure that their software is secure, and we're doing additional monitoring on top of our normal monitoring. We are focused now on making sure that we're doing the analysis of the information so that we can get back in touch with Nova Scotians as quickly as possible about how they could be affected. And that has been our priority.
Thank you. And moving along, we're going to go to Keith Corcoran with Lighthouse Now.
Oh. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Why is the provincial government using out-of-country file transfer services to handle the personal information of Nova Scotians? And why can't the service be provided within the expertise of the civil service, or at least from a domestic provider?
Thank you for the question. Just to be clear, this service is provided here locally. I don't want to get into too many specifics, but I want to be clear to Nova Scotians that this is not about their data being shared outside of country. And so government has made decisions in many instances. Sometimes we do things in-house, and sometimes it makes sense that we procure products that might be better suited to purchase and to get support models in place. That's a very common practice, that you would have a blend of those types of things in your technology estate.
And do you have a follow-up, Keith?
I do, yes. The Department of Cybersecurity and Digital Solutions was established a week before the government identified the vulnerability with MOVEit. In a May 24th news release, government said this new department will enhance cybersecurity and transform the way services are developed and delivered. Given the current situation, could someone please explain whether or not this is the sort of cybersecurity enhancement and service development and delivery transformation Nova Scotians can continue to expect?
What I'd say with respect to your questions, respectfully, is that I've since assuming the role of Minister of Services Nova Scotia Internal Services, I had been responsible for the former division of Nova Scotia Digital Service. The staff within the new department are the same staff. It was an important step for our government to recognize that cybersecurity and implementing digital solutions to meet the needs and expectations of Nova Scotians was the right thing to do. Is it a coincidence that we're dealing with a cyber event less, a week or so after the fact? Perhaps it's a coincidence. I do not know. But what I want to say is reassure to Nova Scotians that we take cybersecurity very importantly, every single day, looking through the best ways of moving forward. As I noted in a previous response, we're moving as a world at a pace that we haven't seen before. Technology is changing, and our best practices, the way that we work, the way that we think, has to also evolve. So I do not certainly want to diminish the importance of this new department anyway. And certainly, as I noted again before, we aren't the first jurisdiction in Canada or in the world to be faced with a cyber attack, and I'm quite confident we won't be the last, unfortunately.
Thank you, Minister. Next, we have Frank Campbell with the Chronicle Herald.
Hi, Minister. In your opening remarks, you mentioned several groups that did not have banking information stolen. Were there any groups that did have banking information stolen?
I'd have to look again through the list, Frank. So my apologies. I don't have that level of detail at the end of my tongue, but again, we're working through the many departments and divisions of government that have been impacted, and certainly when we do our communication directly to Nova Scotians, we will be making every effort to ensure they know how they have been impacted directly.
And as a follow-up, when you do communicate with Nova Scotians, how are you going to do that?
So it's my understanding that it will be either through a written correspondence through mail or through email. All of this depends on the contact information that we do have. And so that's our targeted approach is to do so individually and to be determined if there needs to be a different approach if there's a larger cohort of Nova Scotians that have been impacted differently. But again, I'd note that once we start our communication to Nova Scotians, it'll be communicated that we have initiated that process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Next, we have Tim Bousquet with the Halifax Examiner.
Hi, good afternoon. Back in 2012, the province entered into a $100 million contract with IBM for the SAP system. It's been suggested to me that that system can handle file transfers. So why is it that Move It was installed in the first place?
Thank you for your question. I think I'm not necessarily going to do a deep dive on the technical architecture on all the different systems that SAP might need to communicate with. So sometimes it might be that, yes, SAP can facilitate that, but perhaps other systems on the receiving end cannot. So there are many different technical reasons why you would use a service like this that we're not going to necessarily get into because, again, we can't necessarily reveal those details publicly about our technical architecture.
Thank you, Deputy. Tim, do you have a follow-up?
I do. Obviously, you need to do what you need to do in the face of the hack. And I don't think anyone would criticize you for doing what you're doing now. Do you have a price tag for what this is costing? And related to that, is there any indication that you'll be taking civil action against Ipswich or its parent company?
So what I'd say, Tim, is exactly like you pointed out in your preamble. Our primary focus and objective is now to continue on with our investigation. It's still ongoing. And our second objective is to start that communication rollout. Of course, there is going to be a cost to this, but we are focused on the immediate needs, and that is to get in contact with Nova Scotians as soon as possible to inform them whether they've been impacted or not. And I guess to answer the second part of your question, my apologies. With respect to litigation, again, I tie that as well to our focus at this time is on what I've noted is focusing on communicating to Nova Scotians that have been impacted.
Thank you, Minister. Next, we have Kira Morellin with Radio Canada.
Hi, bonjour. Est-ce que vous pourriez expliquer, ministre LeBlanc, quel genre d'informations vous avez appris qui ont été compromises, s'il vous plaît?
Alors aujourd'hui, nous avons annoncé une mise à jour, une troisième mise à jour cette semaine, depuis ce qu'on a annoncé que oui, il y avait une brèche qui nous a impacté ici en Nouvelle-Écosse. Les informations ont différents... les informations annoncées aujourd'hui listent divers organismes ou divisions du gouvernement, tels que le ministère de l'Éducation et même la fonction publique, comme annoncé plus tôt cette semaine. Alors, notre focus, notre objectif à l'heure actuelle, c'est continuer notre enquête et de là poursuivre avec la communication directe avec les Néo-Écossaises directement impactées. Et ces communications-là commenceront la semaine prochaine.
Is there anything else you want to ask?
Yes. Toujours pour le ministre Leblanc, est-ce que c'est les chiffres finaux, ce qu'on a aujourd'hui? Est-ce qu'on sait que c'est l'étendue des personnes touchées par cette brèche ou est-ce que dans votre enquête, vous attendez à trouver peut-être d'autres personnes?
Alors, plus tôt cette semaine, nous avons communiqué qu'on s'attendait à environ 100 000 Néo-Écossais impactés. Alors, cette mise à jour aujourd'hui est une manière d'une sorte de breakdown qui communique un peu plus de détails, d'une façon détaillée, différents chiffres. Alors, on continue notre enquête et c'est possible que ce chiffre augmente. Mais à l'heure actuelle, c'est de poursuivre avec l'enquête, puis on verra les résultats.
Minister, can you repeat that in English, please? Because I think we have not heard that from you in English.
To remember exactly what I said there and translate. So right now,
the question is, it's 100,000. Are we likely to find more?
So as I noted earlier this week, we communicated that that our investigation had indicated that upwards to 100,000 Nova Scotians could be impacted. That number, as I noted, could change, could go up, or could go down. Today is providing another update of a more detailed breakdown of how Nova Scotians in different divisions or departments have been impacted. We're continuing on with our investigation, and we'll certainly see what the results of our investigation bring, and that number could very well change.
Thank you, Minister. So we do have time to go around again. This time it's for one question for each reporter. So we'll go through the list again, starting with Jean Laroche.
You know what? I'm going to defer to Brian, who has a similar question to mine.
Okay, perfect. Brian, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure. So, Minister, or Minister or Deputy, I'm still not quite clear whether what you're announcing today are all in addition to what we heard the other day. I realize you don't want to do totals of numbers at this point, but I'm really not clear whether or not what you're announcing today is just getting into the details of what you announced the other day, or are there still people who work for the IWK, the Nova Scotia Health, and the civil service who are impacted, who are not really represented on this list that you put out today?
I think I'll jump in, maybe provide a slightly different, maybe a different nuance that might help be able to answer the question. I think what we're into is analyzing different records. And so I think what we're announcing today is the analysis of those files and the information that is in those records. How that relates to an individual, I think the minister gave a couple of examples about how I could be a public servant, a civil servant, that we've talked about, payroll information being impacted, financial information being impacted, but perhaps before I was a deputy of cybersecurity, I was also a teacher that had a certification, and lo and behold, I also have a couple of parking tickets. And so those are multiple records, and that's what we're here to talk about today, again, is disclosing that if you do fall into any of these categories, please be cautious. Please think about, please contact your bank. Please take care and be vigilant about your information, because we have reason to believe that if you possibly do fall into one of these categories, your information has been compromised. You will know individually based on the notification and the letter that you will receive. And so in that scenario that I talked about, perhaps for myself, I might receive 3 different letters. And that's because government does not have one way under which we, uniquely identify one person. So you can be in each of those files in different ways. So that's why it's a little bit more tricky to be able to answer the question about how each individual person has been affected. And I hope that provides some clarity for everybody.
I'm afraid it doesn't actually. I don't feel it quite answers the question that I asked, and I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't clear enough. I'm really trying to understand if those groups that were outlined 2 days ago, the employees of Nova Scotia Health, the IWK employees, and the civil servants, if people who fall into those 3 groups, when they look at this list today, if they're not sort of caught up in one of these lists that in this list that was put out today, are they still vulnerable? Should those people still assume that banking information, their social insurance numbers, and their addresses might have been hacked.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for the clarification on the question. What I would say is our analysis is continuing. This is the information that we feel confident to be able to share with Nova Scotians, in addition to what we have shared earlier this week. As our analysis continues, we will share more information.
Thank you, Deputy. Keith, do you have another question?
Sorry, which Keith?
Sorry, Keith Doucette.
No, I'm good for now, thanks.
Okay, and Jesse Thomas, I believe you have another question?
Hey, thank you. Is this the extent of the cyber attacks through your investigation, or when might we understand the entirety of this, the full impacts?
So what I'd say there is that our investigations is ongoing. So until we have the entirety of that process complete, it's difficult to quantify the answer to your question. So this is our third media availability this week to provide updates, recognizing that we do not have the answers to all these questions, but feel it incumbent on government, incumbent on myself to be as transparent as possible, to provide information as quickly and as soon as possible to Nova Scotians. We take this seriously. I've been personally impacted by a cyber event previously through another organization, and speaking with constituents over the last number of days. I've heard from them as well who've had their firsthand experience with cyber events and breaches and phishing scams. As I noted before, this is a sad reality of living in a digital world, and we all have a responsibility of trying to mitigate the risk and the threats of cyber attacks, whether it be on personal devices, on our phones, through our banking. I know my bank, for example, just implemented two-factor multi-authentication. It is a little bit of a headache at sometimes to go through that process to log into my bank, but I can certainly appreciate the importance of having those evolving technologies and best practices be implemented.
Thank you, Minister. Now we'll go to Keith Corcoran. Did you have another question?
Yes, just out of curiosity, in terms of the agreement between the province and I'll say the Move It provider, what financial consequences does the provider or vendor in question face for a privacy breach that could be payable to the province?
I would say that given we're in an investigation stage and that's our focus, I'm not at liberty to get into those details.
Thank you, Deputy. Frank, do you have another question?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Okay. And Tim Bousquet.
Yes, I do. You may not have the information immediately at hand, I don't know. But I've been trying to discover more about the financial relationship between the province and Ipswich related to Move It. And I don't see Ipswich listed in any public accounts documents or such. Maybe you're going through vendors, I don't know. But can you explain how much money the province has paid for the Move It system over the years?
Great question, Tim. And I feel like I had that at my fingertips the other day, and now I do not. We'll need to follow up and get back to you on that question.
Thank you.
I would take that information too.
Thanks. I'll be in touch with both of you after this.
I would like it as well, please, Brian Flynn.
Perfect. You're on my list.
Yes. Thank you.
No problem.
You can add me too if you would.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm listening to everybody here. Finally, we have Kira Morellen with Radio Canada. Do you have another question?
Yes, I do. And I'll say it in English so you guys know what I'm going to ask. How will people know that this is the government contacting them and not maybe another scammer? If Minister LeBlanc could answer that in French, please.
Alors, notre communication, on s'attend que notre communication commencera la semaine prochaine. Ça sera une communication directe avec les individus impactés par cette brèche de sécurité. On communiquera soit par poste ou par courriel Dans nos communications, il n'y a aucune demande d'informations personnelles, de données personnelles, d'informations bancaires ou de sommes d'argent. Alors, ce seront des communications directes avec ceux et celles impactés. Mais j'aimerais rappeler aux Écossais d'être vigilants durant ces temps. Il y a des gens, des mauvais acteurs qui essaient de prendre avantage de ces genres de situations et qui vont faire leur propre attaque de différentes façons. Alors, un rappel à tous d'être très vigilants.
Thank you very much, Minister. So that is all the time we have today, and that brings our media availability to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.